webinar today. Today's webinar is going to be project shutdown and analysis. So what we're going to be going over would be once we've done our entire project, so it's done, we've delivered to the client, what do we do from there, or how do we get the project fully shut down? Some people think that that just means moving it out of an active status, but it's a little bit more than that. So that is what we will be going over today. A couple of housekeeping tips is the recording for this will usually post in a couple of days. If you need it a little bit sooner, you can always contact support@workamajig.com, ask for the webinar recording, and then you can send it or download it to wherever or whoever needs it. I will be looking at the chat for questions. So yes, there's a Q&A option within Zoom, but I like to just keep it all in the chat. So you can chat any questions that you have at any point, but I will randomly stop just to make sure that we don't have any questions at that point. So again, please use the chat for any questions that you do have while we're doing the webinar. So I'll go ahead and share my screen. So you should see my Today Creatives page. I set up a couple of projects for today's webinar, but I did want to show you that we actually have a help guide for closing projects. So if you're in the help guide, I'm just going to go to close project, and you will see an option for closing projects. Right, so this is going to be pretty close to what we go over today. It'll give you all of the information. So again, if you forget every little step, there is the nice guide for it here as well. And then again, once we've closed the project, we'll see how do we run reports, or what would the helpful reports be after you have closed the project. So for one, I'm going to jump into my recents, but however you get to your projects, you can utilize that. So if it's recent, or if you know the number, you're going to use the global search. But I'm going to go into closing project number 1. So first step of making sure or setting up to close the project would be, is this schedule fully complete? So if I look, and your grid might be a little bit different, but my percent complete is kind of far over to the right, but this is what I'm looking for. So only a couple of my tasks are marked as 100% complete, right? So these need to be completed before I can go in and close the project. Typically, people are completing them as if they're using their Creative Today page, you have that option to say, I'm done with this task. They should be utilizing that as their tracking time, right? And again, Creative Today page is if you are actually assigned to different tasks, depending on if you're in the grid view or the card view, both will have that same information. But whenever I am doing a time entry, I need to be marking mine. This is a planning project, but I need to be marking it as 100% done, right? So I'm done with this task is what I'm referring to. So as we're going along and putting in our time, we should be marking those as done whenever possible. But if I know that these are all done and the people just forgot to do it, then I can go in and set them myself, right? So this complete option will just mark anything that's currently not complete. So you'll notice it didn't change the ones that were complete, obviously, but it did go in and actually set it. Now my schedule is on autosave, so I don't really have to save, it's already done, but typically you want to go ahead and save once you've hit that screen. So that's kind of the first one, is make sure all tasks are 100% complete. The project should be set to a status that's incomplete or inactive and doesn't allow time or expense entries. So this is here, right? The project status, it's also somewhere else. So if you're in your project settings, you have the project settings here. Both are the same thing. Obviously, if I'm already here, this is the faster way to do it. Now, what's considered inactive and or doesn't allow time or expense entries might vary depending on what statuses you have. So I'll show you kind of the back end of where we determine that, but most of the time completed or, you know, final, it might be something that's considered fully done or inactive and doesn't allow time or expense entries, but it's in if you have access to it, admin, system setup, you have global lists, or you can use your search. So if I come in and say project status codes, this is where we're saying, is the project active? I'm looking for things that have no. In addition to that, it also needs to deny time entries and deny expense entries. So I'm looking for 3 different no's, right? And you'll notice there's not a whole lot that have all 3 as no's, right? So really it's just these 3 for my particular instance that allow it. But I'm going to put mine into final build, right? Because that's one of those where it's not active, doesn't allow time entries, and doesn't allow expense entries. So final build. I'm going to put it into that status. When someone goes and tries to do something with this project as far as add expenses, add time entries, I'm just going to do something really quick. You'll notice I don't even have insert row in order to get the miscellaneous costs. And then same thing if I go into a timesheet and try and put 9207. It's not going to let me. It says it doesn't match anything. And again, because that project is in a status that does not allow me to put any time to it. Okay, so you need to make sure that your project is set to an inactive status. The next part of it would be all time entries. They basically have to be handled, and handled meaning they have to be on an invoice. They have to be marked as billed or written off. So there can't be anything on hold. I don't have a lot of clients that are using on hold, but if you are, they need to be taken off of hold. Okay, so for one, it basically said, is everything billed? So for my project, this one's a time and materials. Fixed fee would be pretty much the same thing, because when you go in and bill fixed fee, typically when you go to set up that invoice, it's going to ask, or there's a checkbox to say mark all transactions as billed. It's going to go in and move those transactions to a billed or marked as billed status anyway. So again, whether you bill time and material or fixed fee, when I look at my transactions, and I'm just going to go into the billing tab, you'll notice I have nothing in my unbilled, which is good. But one thing that I also want to check is there anything unapproved? Because I can't bill it if it's not approved. So this is typically a bucket. Again, if you're in either fixed fee or time and material, you want to make sure there's nothing unapproved, because you obviously can't bill or mark it as billed if it's unapproved. So we want to make sure all of our approvals are in before we go in and bill or mark as billed. Okay, but also right before I'm closing the project, I want to check to make sure there's nothing in that unapproved. So I didn't put anything on hold, but again, that might be a bucket that you go in and check. But it looks like all of my transactions have been billed, because again, I put unbilled. Now, if it's a time and material, everything should be in that billed category, which it is. If it was fixed fee, then everything should be marked as billed. You don't really have to check these buckets, but if you just wanted to make sure that you do see transactions on there and are they actually handled, well, this is a good way for me to see that. Is, for one, it opens up to that unbilled status automatically. So if there's anything unbilled, I either want to bill it or mark it as billed. Okay. So that would be one of those steps, is all the time entries, they need to be handled, right? And again, we showed on mine, they are all handled. Now, if you're using billing worksheets, those billing worksheets have to be fully done. Now, I didn't use a billing worksheet for these, but basically when you open up that billing worksheet, which is in your billing today page, if you're not aware, they need to not be in any of these buckets, right? The billing worksheet for that project must be already reviewed, so it has to be approved. And then once it's approved, you have to go in and create that invoice. Okay, so not in either of these 2 statuses. It does have to be over here, either waiting to be submitted or approved or any of that. But that's what your worksheets need to be in, is where it actually says that there's an invoice created. So if I look into these ones, if I pull up the billing worksheet, it should have me say generate the invoice. If the invoice is already generated, it would show the invoice number. So as long as I see an invoice number here, then I know the system is going to allow me to close that project. All orders must be closed. So on one of my projects, I created a order. It was a purchase order. I believe it's on this one, but that order does need to be approved, right? So if I look in here, I should go to my purchase orders or my order section. You can also pull up through transactions, and that might be the best way to go. I'm going to just run an all transactions screen. There's the labor part, and then here's my order, right? So I have an order in here. If I see the order, that means the vendor invoice has not been linked to this order. So likely this particular order is not closed, and I can verify that. I was just in that transaction screen. I clicked in to open up the order, and then you'll see under here, I have a close option, which means that this order is open. Okay, so this has to be closed, or it has to be dealt with at some point. Two ways to close. One is just adding in a vendor invoice up to the total amount. So my total is, that $10. I need to add a vendor invoice for $10 and link it to this order. The other way is if this just whole thing got canceled, or maybe they're not going to bill us because they made an error, whatever it is, if I am not going to add a vendor invoice, or maybe I did add a vendor invoice, but it was only $9 instead of 10, then I can just use this close option. This will then close the order and allow me to close the project. I'll show you what we're talking about as far as closing the project. So if I am in the project, I have project settings here. And then if I go into the accounting tab, this is the box that we're kind of talking about when we say close, because again, we might have a project status that's considered to be closed, but that one's a little bit different. That's just putting it inactive. It's also denying expense or labor transactions. This one is actually disallowing certain things to happen once we close it. So if I go in and close it, a couple of tabs will go away. Usually the billing tab would go away, and then everything kind of gets locked down. So I wouldn't be able to move it to a different status. Of course, I wouldn't be able to put time or expenses to it. So just a couple of things happen whenever we actually go in and close it. But since I have something open, it'll say, do you want to close all purchase orders, including pre-built? So it already knows that there's an order open for this particular project, and it again needs to be closed in order for me to go in and actually save this, right? So if I say no and I hit save, it's going to error me out, and it says that it has to be an inactive production status, right? So this one's in production. Anything that's preventing it from getting closed, you'll get that error. Now, if there's multiple items that are going to prevent it, it usually just shows one at a time. So once I move this to a different status, let's say I put it to that final build, I can go in and try and close it. But again, I'm going to get a different error this time. If I hit no and save, it has unbilled time entries. So again, it's going to continue to go through this process of telling me all the things that are wrong or not done in order for me to close this project. Any questions right now? Okay, so then the next item on the list was vendor invoices and client invoices must be entered, right? So vendor invoices falls under expenses. So if I had moved the vendor invoice or the project from a status that allowed expenses to a status that doesn't allow expenses, well, that vendor invoice falls under an expense. So I wouldn't be able to add it. So I need to make sure that my project is in a status that allows expense entries. And then client invoices, kind of the same thing. I should be billing before I move it to that inactive project or status. One of the questions was, when closing from the accounting tab, can you unclose? Absolutely, yes. So it basically is just kind of locking the project down, but it's kind of like the GL close date, where you can put a close date in there to prevent posting and unposting. But if I had a mistake or needed to do something, you could just remove that GL close date. Same thing with closing the project. So I'll go in and close my 9207. It should be able to be closed. So once I go in and do that, hit that save button, it went away, right? So it's closed. We can see it's locked down. So again, I mentioned I won't be able to move it from this status, and my billing tab is gone as well. So if I do need to open this project up for whatever reason, you can click into those project settings, go in there, and you're just basically unchecking that box, and then you have to hit save in order for that to be effective, and then it's open again. So yes, it's not a hard close. You are able to go in and unclose it as needed, but hopefully you'll have done all the checks that you need to in order for us to kind of leave it at that closed or catch anything that needs to be done beforehand. The next question was, what happens if we don't change tasks to 100% complete? I think it still actually lets you, so I'm going to uncheck, let's just say these final two. Actually, I'll just remove the 100% complete in here. So two of my tasks are not listed as complete. If I go in, hit the project settings, and then go in and close it, save, see, it still lets you. We just say check it, or that's on the checklist, just because if those tasks are open, does that mean people still need to track time? Did they just not track their time yet, which is why they didn't mark it as closed? Or do we need to do a final review of maybe whatever we're delivering to the client? So it will actually let you physically close the project, even if your schedule isn't 100% complete. But it is the first item on here because, again, maybe someone, it just holds off on putting their time into the end of the week. Obviously, that's definitely not something that Workamajig recommends. We're hoping that you are doing daily timesheets just so that the project is as accurate as possible at any moment that people are checking it. But if they are holding off on putting their time to the end of the week, then that's why we say check your schedule just to see, well, is there anything open? And then why is that task not done? Did we just not deliver it to the client, or do we still need to track time? And that's why we didn't mark it as done. So yes, you can still close the project if the schedule is not 100% done. But if you were to ask Workamajig, what's the recommendation? We would say go in and mark those 100% done, just so that we know we're not expecting or we're not waiting on something else. Okay, so all vendor invoices and client invoices must be entered. Now, obviously, there's a ton of ways to bill. It doesn't matter which of those ways you choose to bill, just as long as if it's fixed fee, we billed to estimate, or if it's time and material, we went in and billed all of the transactions, or maybe wrote them off or mark them as billed, however you want to do that, or however you bill, whether it's in the project or in the mass billing or billing worksheets, as long as there's invoices for this project in full, meaning however much you intend to bill for that project, you will have billed that amount before you go in and close. Because you cannot bill the project, and you'll even see once it's in that completed status, there's no bill option for me. It's usually between budget and transactions. It's just gone altogether. Now, some people will ask, once it's closed, how do I see what happened on that project? There's a couple of ways to do that. So the budget will still show what did you estimate versus the actuals that came in. So if I'm looking at it by item, and there's a couple of ways to view it, obviously, but it'll say what did we budget and what did that equate to, how many actual hours, and then if you have, different columns in there, what's my remaining, if there is any. But this would be a good way to see, budget versus actuals is just within that budget tab. And again, there's a lot of different ways to view this. So if you have system settings as an option, you can pull in all kinds of different columns if needed. So again, this is the labor side. This is the expense side. So if I go in and say, I need to know, what the build difference was, or what we allocated, or, obviously tons and tons and tons of different columns that you have. Maybe I wanted to know hours remaining on there. Once I go in and kind of set each of those, and again, you'll see the different headings, and then it'll say, well, what are the columns that we want to see? Then you can go ahead and hit save. I did it for the company, but you might do it just for a particular security group or groups at that point. But if I go in and check, then here's my hours remaining. So I can see I went under or over on a couple of these. So I was only budgeting for 7 hours, I believe it was, but I actually did 8.5. So I went over by an hour, but I went under on this one, right? So everything might kind of cancel out or work out for the better for this particular project. But the budget tab is a good way to see it. And then some people want to know, well, did we put in all of our transactions? Well, then obviously running the transaction screen would probably be a good idea as well. So if I go into transactions, I have a couple, I think the default is just one particular view for this. So you might not see all of these, but just know that you can add more. I'm just going to run all transactions and run it, not narrow it down by anything, but then you'd be able to see mine's grouped by labor and expenses, right? So here's all my labor transactions. Here's what they total to. Here's all of my expenses. This is just the miscellaneous cost, but if I had vouchers and credit card charges and expense reports, I might see a heading for each of those if that's what we had in there. But this would show you whether it was marked as billed, and it might say a yes. And then if it was billed on a transactions, that could also be a column that I have in there. I don't have it in there now, but it's just a good way to see what transactions you have on the project. So if we said, hey, we did put the expense in there and that's what we estimated for, or if I don't see an expense, then maybe I shouldn't have this project closed yet, because maybe we are waiting on some sort of invoice to come in. Okay. Any questions right now? Looks like Stacy has a question. Is the chat disabled? Okay. Well, I see some people. Okay, so just use the Q&A then, if the chat is disabled. Sorry about that. So yeah, go ahead and do your questions in the Q&A then. Apologies for that. Okay, so while I'm waiting for questions, I'll go ahead and kind of move on to the next part of it, which would be that the actual review side, right? So once we're done, how do we do an analysis of the project? Now, one of the questions was, what if nothing shows up below transactions? Then nothing has hit the project. We haven't put any time or any expenses to the project. Or the other option is maybe you have a filter. So if I come in and I have some sort of something in here, right? So if I put something that doesn't make sense, I'm just going to do rec, then I don't think any of my my transactions match that. So clear your search criteria. You have that clear option just to make sure that you're not filtering out anything in particular. If you only see this, you don't know how to get to the filters, little hamburger icon will allow you to bring up that search criteria. If you're still not knowing everything, if you have the option, check your filters, right? So if you have the option, you have that modify, I always go to filters to see, is there anything being filtered out? So I'll show you what I mean by that. So if I do transaction type is equal to credit card, because I know I don't have any on there. When I run this, it shouldn't have anything. Say, sorry, we don't have anything, because again, my filters dictate that I'm only looking for credit card charges. There were never any credit card charges. So, you know, that's filtering it out. So check to see if there's anything where the prompt is unchecked. That means that it is always searching for that particular criteria or filter that you have. And then when I remove that filter and hit search, then everything shows up again. So check to see two options. One is, are you filtering out anything? Two is under your modify, do you have any non-prompted filters? And again, non-prompted being this is not checked for whatever your field is. The third option is there's just no transactions at all. Either we put them to a different project, or maybe if we entered in a vendor invoice and we know we entered that vendor invoice in, did we just not code it to the project? So I'll kind of show you something really quick. So if I skip project altogether here, or the other option is maybe I did put the project, 9207 is one of mine. Oh, right, because it's not in the active status. 9208. Both of those aren't active. So we'll put it to this one. So if I put it here, but on my expense line, I don't actually have a project listed here. This, let's say $100 expense will not hit that project. Okay, so if I look to whatever project I had listed here, which was my 001 project, but I don't have anything listed here, this line is not hitting that project. Okay, so it won't show up as an expense on the project. So a couple of reasons again, but I'm just not showing. Oh, you're saying all transactions as a view. So yours might be labeled a little bit different. So when you go into transactions here, yours might be labeled a little bit different. Again, everyone has the option of kind of customizing their Workamajig. So if you don't see something that encompasses all, maybe you see like labor transactions and expense transactions and maybe someone's particular view, then you can always, if you have, or if you know how to do your custom reports, then you can set up one that just is all. Usually what I recommend is what are the headers that you want, right? So when you're in that modify, do you need to group it in any way? Mine group by type, so I can kind of group things together by the transaction type, but you don't have to do it that way. And then what are the fields that you want? So I want to know when, I want to know what, and how many. I wanted to know what it was marked as billed, what was the net and the gross, what's the item, the type is in there again, but it's kind of redundant, so I could remove it, and then whether it's approved or not, and we build it, and then I could do something like build on invoice to see what invoice it was, hit that search. So then once you've kind of set that up, you can go in and then kind of label it however you want. So if you go to settings, you can call it all transactions or kind of whatever. So if you're just missing the all transactions view, then either set one up, or if you can't set it up, have one of your admins either set it up, or they can email in and we can set it up for them. Okay, so then any other questions right now? Okay. So now on to kind of the review once the project is closed. What's nice is there's going to be some snapshots and profitability options within the project itself. So I don't really have to go very far. Now, by default, I don't believe these are turned on. So if you scrolled all the way down past your custom field section here and you don't see any of that, it kind of skips directly to team, then what you want to do, again, if you have the options, is under the more, you have those system settings. So we're just in the project more, because I know there's a couple of different places, but if you scroll down a bit, you'll notice show project snapshot and show project profitability are two options that may be unchecked again, because by default, I believe for creatives and a couple of groups, it's not going to be checked automatically. So if that is something that you want them to see, you could either do it at a company level, or again, you can just override certain groups. So if I said, my advanced PM people, then I might override and then turn it on for them if it was not on for them. So again, you can choose to do it at a company default level, or you can do it at a security group level as needed. But that's where those options to turn those are, is the project snapshot and the project profitability. One nice thing about these sections is a lot of people are not terribly sure what all of these mean. We actually have a help guide for those. So if I go into project snapshot, I believe it is the projects page. So if you go into that project manager projects guide, if I scroll down, there should be a section that would talk about each of those different options and what they mean. Okay, maybe it's not here. We'll just go to projects. maybe it's not this one. But one of these will have it and it'll show each of the actual breakdowns of what this means, right? So it'll say, well, what does total amount billed? Obviously, that one's a little bit more self-explanatory, but each one of these will actually have a explanation on it as well. So going down to the project snapshot option, it always opens to the hours section, but it always remembers what you were at previously. You have hours here, and so it'll say what was your total budgeted hours, how many actual hours did I do, and what's remaining. So I had 16 hours remaining. And then you have your hour or your average hourly rates in there, and then your total allocated hours. So my allocation could be different than my budget, or it could be the same. And allocated hours come from that schedule, right? So if I go into schedule, when I put numbers within here, this is what it's talking about as far as allocation. So I allocated 1 hour to account management, 1 hour to art direction, 1 hour to general, 1 hour to project coordination. So these are allocated hours. And then estimated hours are obviously what's on your estimate, and they can be one and the same, or they could be different, because on the estimate, you might kind of overestimate, but you're going to allocate a different amount because maybe obviously we're trying to get it done in less hours. So just know that allocation and budgeted hours could be the same, or they could be different. Okay. Now I have multi-currency turned on, so I also see a currency field. If you don't have multi-currency, you might not see that. And obviously it wouldn't matter if you do see that, but it at least gives you what currency did you add this project in. So these snapshots would be a good way to see some overall information on here. You'll notice this does have an options. There's only a few options in here, but you can say snapshot options. And again, there's only a few things. So do I include unapproved transactions or not? Because maybe I don't want to include them since they're not kind of actuals at that point. Because again, I can't bill them if they're unapproved. Do I want to include sales tax or not? And then how do I allocate my overhead, right? So if I have overhead, do I want to go by hours, labor costs, total bill, or just none at all? I usually choose none. And then what's my realized rate method? You have a couple of those different options as well. So just a few options for within here, but really on the profitability side, there's not a whole lot of options. This is how it is as far as what this would show. But this would be a great way to see how did we do on this particular project. So you have project profitability and then the project snapshot that you can view directly from within the project. So one of the questions was, how do you get the project snapshot on the dashboard? So that was that option. If I go to more, you have the system settings. Again, if you have those options, and then if you're wanting it for the company, you would leave it at company defaults. If you want to set it up for just a particular group, then you can override it and then choose whether they see that particular section or whether they don't. Obviously, if it's checked, you can see it or they can see it. If it's not checked, it's not an option for them. Any other questions? Okay. So I'm going to move on to another report. Now, one of these is actually something that's not a standard report, but one of our account managers set it up, and a lot of clients could possibly benefit from it. And it's called a post-mortem report. So on my schedule, you'll even see that I put that there's something called like a post-mortem. This is a way to say, okay, well, now the project is done. How did we do? Did we overestimate? Did we underestimate? Was there a particular person that, just overdid on their hours? So postmortem is kind of doing a pulse check. How did we do on that project? Were we profitable? And so we actually set up a report that's called postmortem. And again, it's just one that one of our account managers set up. So it's not a standard report, but you can go in and actually pull it into your system if you wanted to. So if you go to import, one of those options is going to be custom. report. So I know this kind of seems odd, but it is a way to get that custom report. And if you scroll all the way down, you'll see pre-made custom reports. Postmortem is one of them. Now, obviously, there's a couple of others that you can take a look at or kind of review, but it'll even tell you this is a project performance-based report to see how you did after completion, tracks budget versus actuals, along with baseline and actual Z. Now, some of you might not be using baseline or even know what that is, but we'll talk about that in a second. But how you can get this into your own Workamajig is you click on the report to download it, right? So it went into my downloads, and I need to put that onto my computer somewhere, or so that I can actually import it. But whoops, I'm trying to get to my main screen. So once I have it downloaded, right, I want to pull that somewhere so I can actually get to it. So it's on my desktop. Next, what you need to do is you're going to go into your Workamajig, going to go to your more, and you have admin, if you have it, import data. So it's going to be another import that you do, same as you do with the other ones. Now, instead of calling it a report, it's actually a view, and you won't see report on here. So if I, was to click on the drop down and try and find report, you won't find report as one of those options. Again, and that was report groups, so not reports. So again, this is a view that we are importing. I want to select a file for import. I put it on my desktop so it was easy to find. There's that postmortem report. It'll show that there it is. It's a CSV, which is what we need. You're going to hit display file, and you're not going to do anything with any of these. Okay, if you do that, it's possible it doesn't come in. So then I import selected. It'll say imported as long as you didn't change anything. If it failed, then that means that one of your headers, you probably changed something or moved something. So now that it's in the system, where does it go? It's considered to be a custom report. So you're going to be in menu. You have everyone. It's going to be in the report center. And then if I go in and it was called postmortem, I'm going to start typing in post. You'll see postmortem report, right? And obviously this one's kind of big just because we put a lot of detail into the description, but this is where it is. Otherwise, it typically just comes into your other report section because it doesn't really know where else to put it, and you would see it there. But again, it is searchable. So you click into it. If you want to remove this really long option or view description, then you can go into the edit and you can go into those settings. This is where all of that is. If you like it, or if you feel like it would be beneficial for someone to see, obviously you can leave it. But what it would do is it does have some search criteria that you can narrow down. Otherwise, if you just try and run this, it's a massive report and it's going to take a while to run. The idea was that you're either doing it by project, right? So I might choose a particular project number and then run it. And then it'll tell me whether I went over, under on a couple of different things, right? So by task, it's showing me how did it go? What are my results? And then again, baseline we'll talk about in a second. But this is a nice little report, and obviously it's customizable, right? So this was just a way for us to be able to give you some sort of setup to be able to see how did we do with each of those different tasks and whether there was a budget or not. But if you said, hey, that's great, I also want to add, well, then you can go in and insert row. Don't mess with any of those calculations that are already in there unless you just don't want that particular field. That's fine. You can remove it if you want to. But once it's gone, and you also cannot re-import that report if it's already existing. Right. So if you kind of mess with something, you can't get it back, probably best just to delete the whole thing and then re-import it all together. But just know that you can still edit from here. But again, I don't really recommend editing any of the calculations because they took a while to set up. But you can always add or edit some of the filters or do some changes. You can also rename it. So obviously this is a pretty long name and maybe you just want to call it postmortem report. It's fine. Just go in. apply whatever changes you're done with, hit that memorize, and then it'll just be post-mortem report from that point forward. Okay, so we have a couple of questions. Where does a write-off go under project profitability? So ultimately, a write-off is basically saying you had the option of billing it, but you didn't, right? So it's not really going to affect you per se. You're just not seeing additional income on whatever the item was. Is the postmortem report based on project start date or project due date? As far as the date range, so when I'm in here, it's just going to show, I don't think it's filtering out any dates in particular, but you have like project close date as an option. You also have project due date if you're running it. Otherwise, if I don't fill this out and I just chose what project it is, it's showing me everything. All right, so in here, I just chose the project, so it's showing me all of the transactions for that project. Again, I can narrow it down by, maybe a particular date, but I didn't. So it's just showing me everything for that particular project. Someone said, can you quickly show where you go after you download the report, or can I wait for the transcript? I can show you because I might have gone through it fast. So it's on my background, right? We put it postmortem here, however you get that done. And then where you're going to go once it's saved is you're going to go into Admin Manager, and it's going to be an import. Okay, so if you have Admin Manager, then you have that import data option here. The type of import is going to be view. I know it kind of sounds not similar, but we have a lot of views in the system. These views are all considered to be views, so that was kind of our reasoning behind it. It's considered to be a view. You're going to select a file for import, and hopefully it should be the first one if you're kind of sorting by date modified, which is how I do it. So then you click on it, hit that open option. From there, you don't have to do anything else. You just hit display fields and don't uncheck this. So just leave it as it is and then import it. And then again, this should show imported once it's actually done. So again, don't mess with any of this. Some of this might look wrong, or some of the time when you're importing a custom report, you'll actually see that it says, what is it called? Not mapping or something like that. So I'm going to change this to something else. Actually, I don't think I can. But some of the time it'll be in yellow and say, not mapped or something similar to that. Leave it. So again, don't touch anything, even if you see that it's not mapping, because it's set however it needs to be in order to get that imported. And then if for some reason you do not have access to import, or you can't find it, you can always ask your support person to import that, because again, obviously it's pretty quick to do. So we can do that for you, and then you guys can customize it as you need to. But again, that's the one that I would recommend, is the post-mortem. You do have a couple of others that we kind of set up. And if you have other agencies that have Workamajig and they have a report that you like, they can do the same thing, okay? So in any of your reports, even if they're views, so I'll just show you the view side of it. Let's say I have a project view that we like, or maybe the transaction view or something like that. When you go into any of those and you do the modify, there's going to be a export view option. This is what we did to get it on that help guide. It basically exports the CSV, right? You would send this to someone, they would download it to their computer, and then again, they would go through that same import process. So if another company has a view, or reports work the same way, so if they have a set custom report that you want, then, so let's say this one, I don't even really know what's on it. But again, you go into that edit, the more, export the view, send it to whoever you need to, and then they can import it same way that you saw the postmortem being imported. Go to that menu, admin, import, select the file, or choose view, select the file, and then hit that import option. Okay. All right, how do you get the report to be in colors. I just pulled one and it's all black. Your report is more helpful. So if you don't have, so if I am understanding you correctly, mine had different colors in it. Oops. It's just because maybe you don't have some numbers in there, right? So if I don't have any labor in there, I might not see anything in there. Or if I don't have some of the details in here. So if I didn't add a budget, or maybe there's no time or something like that, then that's probably what's causing it to be black and white. Otherwise, if you think that you do have that information, then that'd probably be something better for your support person to take a look at to see if they can troubleshoot it. Okay, so the last report that I'll mention that would also be good to run would be the project profit and loss. So that is going to be in the report center as well, but I'll show you menu. You have everyone. This is going to be the report center. So already where we were, and again, that postmortem was here, but if you do project profit, or if you just do project P, you'll see project profit and loss. Now there's two of them. One is a detail view, so you have to choose a project here. Multi means that you don't have to choose a particular project because it's going to run for several. Now for me, I'm just going to choose the project profit and loss, the detail view, and I'm just going to do everything, right? Because I want to see everything for one particular project. So I'm going to go to my all, and I'm going to use one of my new projects that we were in. So I'll use this one. And then really, I don't have to do anything else, but you have that allocate overhead by, right? And this will tell you each of those options. So kind of starting from the first one, it'll say, overhead allocation. It gives you some of the breakdown. So if you do hours, then it's labor hours, and it'll say this is the total number of hours, approved hours. So it's important that it's approved hours, because some people say, hey, I don't think all of the hours are going in. If they put time, but they did not get their timesheet approved, it's only looking at approved hours. Okay, and I think that's all of these if it's looking at the time for hours or labor. So this is approved number of hours charged to the client divided by the total number of approved hours for the date range, right? So I did all hours, or I did it all for the date range, so it would just be everything. Labor cost is a little bit different. So so again, that's what's going to show you, or what is going to be behind each of these. If you're just not sure what we mean by hours, then take a look at this one. Labor cost is this one, total bill is this one, and then if you do none, that's the no allocation option. Okay, so I'm just going to leave it as it is here. I'm going to go ahead and run that, but this is a good way to see the breakdown of everything for this particular project, right? And since I did all, you're going to look and see it's a very crazy date, but just know that it's just basically everything that happened within that particular project. You can see where everything fell, what my inside costs are, and all of that. So there you would be able to see what your net profit is, what your labor hours were. And what's nice is you can click into these fields. Oh, no, drill down for some of them. So you might not see it for all of them, but these ones definitely will, right? Because it'll show you what fell within those. So some of these are going to be drill downs, others are not, but this is definitely a great report to run if you need it. Oh, printing, yeah, might be a little bit different. So one of the questions was, mine is in color, but when I run it, but when I print it, it's black and white. That might just be an enhancement request, meaning most of them will just export as black and white, because that's what most of the reports are set to do. So maybe just send that into support, see if we can add that as an enhancement request, because I think that's just a limitation. So that is kind of everything. Again, the three places that I recommend kind of doing after the project is done, what do we see? I would say within your project, you have that the snapshot and the profitability section. Each of these are going to be a little bit different as far as what information it holds. So you can see the information there. So that would be one. The other is that post-mortem report. So if you go to other, or once you've imported it, then you can go find that report wherever it is and then run it. And then the last one is going to be that project profit and loss. So again, if you type in project, you would see that option for either the detail or the multi. When you run multi, then I'm going to do all again, but I'm going to choose for a particular client, which is just called webinar. That's the one that my 2 projects were under. Run it. And then again, this would show you multiple projects rather than just one, but it should still group it by project. So you can see, it's grouping by each of those different projects. And then again, giving me some basic information. What's nice is this one is customizable. So obviously we don't know what columns everyone will want. But if you want to go in and modify, maybe add some different columns in here, you're more than welcome to do that. This is one of the few custom reports that we set up that you can actually go in and modify. This is something that you can drill down into as well. So I really like this particular report as well. And then again, if you're just not sure what the calculations are, if you hover over field, it'll tell you net profit is the AGI minus other allocated or expenses allocated minus side costs and plus other income. This is AGI minus total. So again, really handy to have this particular report. It is customizable. And then again, if you're just not sure how we come to a particular calculation, you can go in and hover over those fields. But that is what I have for you today. Again, the reporting or the recording will post. Typically where we put it is if you go to the help guide and you're just kind of in the main help guide section, you have that webinars section. And then again, once it's done, then it should just be under one of these particular sections right now. It'll just be up in the upcoming because we haven't really changed it, but this is where we are today. That's what's coming up next, but that's where you'd be able to see that recording. Otherwise, you can always reach out to your account manager and then can send it to you as well. Any last questions before I let you go? One of the questions that I missed, and I apologize, is there a report that you can run that shows all unapproved hours? So, yes, I would say that probably your transaction view. So I know you have your transaction view within a project that can do it as well. Sorry about that. Okay, so I'll kind of redo that, but I'm not sure where it kind of cut off at. But for the question was, is there a report that shows all unapproved hours? That would be one of those transaction reports. So if you're looking at just the particular project, then you can go into the project, go into that transaction section. And then again, if you have a labor one, you can utilize that one. Otherwise, if you want to start a new one, so meaning having another one, then you can go into all transactions, modify. You're going to copy the view so it leaves all transactions as it is. And then you would make sure that it's filtering for the transaction type would be actually, yeah, we would do labor. So it would just look for labor transactions. And then you would do approval status is not equal to approved. And what that would do is it'll look for all transactions. Again, we're on a project and it would say all labor transactions that are not, because we said not equal to approved. Nothing should show on mine because all of my transactions are approved. Oh, am I in the main one? Sorry. Yeah, so I was just in the main one, but it should show anything that's not approved. And then you have the same thing if you're not in a project. Maybe you're looking for all transactions or labor transactions that aren't approved. You have a view. So if you go into that magnifying glass, you go to views, you have transactions here. Again, all transactions, maybe you make a copy of it again. Whoops. Copy this view, and then my filters would be, my type would be transaction type is equal to labor. So you're basically doing the same thing, but again, this would just be on a all project level rather than an individual project level. So then this should just show everything that's currently labor and not approved, right? So you'll see not sent, sent for approval. So I don't have a whole lot. I have 13 time transactions that are not approved, but this is a great way to find them. And then what I would do is call this, oops, under my filters, I would say all unapproved labor. Either leave it as private or not if you want others to be able to run it, but then I would mod or memorize that. When I look on my transactions, I have 4 views instead of just 3. In addition to that, all unapproved. All right, next one was, is there a way to see the difference between total billed and total actual costs? I would say that that would probably be under your transactions as well, just because if you're actually, I want to narrow it down by project so I don't see everything, but I'll go into one of my projects. Your transaction screen can show, let's see, your net and your gross, and then in addition to, if you wanted to add in billed amount, and then there was a billed difference if you wanted to know what the difference was. So that would be a good way to see what you have. So obviously I just billed everything, but if I didn't bill everything, then you'd be able to see the difference between the two. So that would be a good way to see that. So we're at time. We'll go ahead and end it here. If you have additional questions, obviously you can still contact your support person, should be support@workamajig.com. If you want a more specified training, you could do training@workamajig.com, and then they can talk through kind of more actual scenarios. But the one thing that I wanted to point out is when you're looking at like a projects view or something similar, there's an actual checkbox that can be in there. Actually, it wouldn't be under active. It would be like a all projects view. But you'll notice one of them is closed. That box that we were checking in the project where it said whether it's closed or not, that's what it's referring to. It's so this project settings, accounting, this closed box equates to this. This is not the project status, whether it's closed or not. Because again, some people have an actual project status called closed. This checkbox is not the same as the project status. This checkbox where it's a yes or no is specific to this. Okay, so whether this is checked, so this project, the checkbox or would be considered closed. My other project, the 9208, it's not closed. So then for that project, it would be a no. My 9208 would fall under no. My 9207 would be a yes. Okay, so hopefully you guys found this helpful. Again, reach out if you do have any questions, and the recording should post in a couple of days. Have a great day.